We're here to welcome Joan Jobe Smith. She's a wonderful poet, one of my favorite Long Beach poets. Absolutely adore her voice. And just when I found Bukowski, and then I found Joan, and I found Fred, who's sitting right up here, and Lachlan, it was like the whole entire world had opened up to me. You know, I thought, you know, you could only like rhyme, or you had to be formal. You had to like step up your game and your vocabulary to like become a poet. I didn't realize you could have linoleum in a poem, or you could, you know, smash a sledgehammer on the concrete, or whatever it is that we working class, you know, people, actually just people in general do. But Joan Jobe Smith is a graduate from CSU Long Beach and also the UC Irvine MFA program. And just yesterday I found out that she also went to LBCC. She was a Viking at 17, trying to impress her young female professor by writing by hand and in red ink. You know they love to write in red ink. You were taking her game away. Yeah. Well, back in the day, they used to write in red. So she writes in her post, "I was certain that my clever use of red ink substantiated the originality and wit exhibited in my colorful prose. However, her huge handwritten C- in black ink countered and crushed my confidence. So even though I was getting A's in California geography and PE and loved LBCC and loved the crumb donuts and the snack bar and the sunny quad where all the cute, cool boys hung out, I became a dropout frosh." That's classic Joan. That's her voice. It's playful and it's entertaining. But of course we know she went on. She went on to CSU and Irvine, so you know we know that he didn't fail when it came to education. What I really love about Joan's work, however, is that when I enter one of her poems, I enter a world of, you know, real people and places where her exceptional voice can take flight, and I no longer feel like I'm reading a poem, but I'm told a story so compelling, so authentic that I can't distinguish between her speaking voice and her writing voice. So while her poems use natural language, pop culture, and humor, they're also sincere, brutal, and a hoarse kick to the heart. Her recent books are Charles Bukowski, Epic Glottis, His Work and His Women and Me, Tales of an Ancient Go-Go Girl, and Moonglow A Go-Go, new and selected poems. Since 1950, her art, poetry, prose, cooking columns, memoirs, reviews have been published in more than 1,000 literary journals, newspapers, and anthologies. She is a Pushcart honoree with 23 books, including 2 cookbooks. That's impressive. Her award-winning work has recently appeared in Ambit UK, Swallow Dance, Chiron Review, Nerve Cowboy, among others. She has done 7 reading tours in UK and Scotland with her husband, Fred, and her UK published poetry collection, The Powwow Cafe, was a finalist for the 1999 Forward Prize. Please help me give a warm welcome to Joan Jobe Smith.
The awkward moment with the, there it goes. Let me see. The awkward moment with the microphone. Does it work?
Yes, it does.
Okay, it's working. All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. And thank you for coming out in the rain. Do you guys want to sit down? Thank you for coming out in the rain, but I think the rain stopped. And I'd like you to all know that Jeff Epley, Mr. Epley, if he's called by your kids, you fine student.
I'm Jeff at Trader Joe's, prof in the class.
Are you prof? Are you Mr. Prof? But anyway, Jeff happens to be one of my favorite poets. And several times in my literary journal that I founded in 1974, but Jeff wasn't submitting then. Later in the 2000s, after he got an MFA from Cal State Long Beach, we published several of your poems. And I don't know, did they know about that one poem of yours? You know?
Yes, maybe.
Okay, all right. Well, I don't know if we can say that word in this classroom, can we? I better not. We'll just call it the Big D.
Let me fix your mic really quickly.
And I don't mean Dallas.
Yes.
Does that work now?
Yes.
Okay.
You're good.
Well, it's really fun to be back here at LBCC, and although this campus on the side of Carson is totally unfamiliar to me, I'm now being able to look out the window at the campus that I loved at age 17 when I went there. And I lived on Lakewood Boulevard, about 3 apartments off Harvey Way, and I got to walk to school every day. And of course, there'd always be some cute guy that would honk. And of course, I wasn't allowed to hop in any cars with strange, cute guys. But it was fun. All those great cars back then. It was so irresistible. But I loved the red bricks roofs and everything about LBCC. And I really wanted to go to college. But I left for pitiful reasons and then went on. In fact, Long Beach has just been a complete garden for me since the age of, I think I was a year and a half when my mother left Texas, where I was born. I was born in Paris, Texas. And we came to California for my mother to be a Rosie the Riveter over at Douglas. So that's some deja vu too. And this little Bermuda Triangle, or let's call it possibly a writer's parabola, living here in Long Beach is just really magnificent for me. I got to live on the Pike when I was a little girl, little baby. And it doesn't look like any of you are old enough to know about the Pike here in Long Beach. Maybe you heard tell of it if you're not old enough to have ever been there. And I love the Pike, and then I lived several years off and on. I've been living in Long Beach for about 35, but no, how many years, Fred? 30 years since I married Fred Voss. And long ago, after I was age 17, when I was 25, I worked as a go-go girl at a scandalous go-go bar on Lakewood where that dental clinic is, and it was called Abner's 5. And Abner's 5, there were 6 of them, and they were mafia owned, so that's how they got away with the sleazy stuff they did. And the sleazy stuff they did there was to have bikini girls working there serving beer, showing off, God forbid, their belly buttons. And I'm going to read some poems now to tell you about it. But I worked at Abner's for 2 years as a go-go girl. I worked a total of 7 years in go-go bars back in the 60s and early 70s. And then I went back to school, Cal State Long Beach, and went a year in law school, trying to be something. And it was so hard to do back in the 70s. I know you young women are having a really rough time of it going to school, but so are you guys too. School's always hard. And law school was hard, but I liked it. But I wound up doing what I really wanted to do, following my bliss, and went to UCI for MFA. I was lucky that they liked my work and took me in, and here I am. So I'm going to read something now instead of talk. These did me no good. I don't know where these poems are. I thought, oh, good thing I did this. Okay, well I'm going to start out with a pretty poem. I hope it's pretty. And of course, Jeff's already told you I'm a narrative writer. I try to use language and abstractions because they seem so important, but I just don't think that way. I guess I'm just not smart, but I'm just a natural storyteller for what I'm worth. I come from talking Texans and Welsh, and I'm Irish and Scottish, and the oral tradition means a lot to certain cultures that they talk. They talk in stories. My parents talked in stories. They'd have dialogue. They'd have a resolution. They'd have they were great with hyperbole and simile, and I just love hyperbole and simile. This is called An Endless River of Silvery Moons. Everything was silver when I was a kid, with Hi-O silver and Lone Ranger silver bullets, as silver airplanes flew off to World War II. All of our money, silver dimes and dollars, movie stars on the big silver screen smiling, silver teeth, wore silver streaked hair, drove cars made of silver hump bumpers, big grinning grills and hubcaps, silver glitter swirls beneath silvery fog sunsets. In San Francisco, while I set the supper table with silver forks, spoons, and knives. And sometimes, after they tucked me into bed, my mother and father in the living room, cheek to cheek, danced in the dark while Artie Shaw's 78 RPM clarinet played Stardust. And I watched, waited to grow up, to live my life too, beside the light of an endless river of silvery moons. Well, moons mean a lot to me, as you can tell. I named my most recent book, and possibly my last. I'm not writing as much as I used to. And Moon Glow a Go-Go. I love the moon. And it's raining today, so I want to read you a poem about my mother. My mother's one of my muses. I don't know. How many of you are writers? Is this a creative writing class? Are you all? How many are poets?
Who's going to wear that badge? I don't know.
How many of you are prose writers or want to write that great mystery novel? And do you ever think of your muses? Maybe you haven't written long enough to start thinking about them yet, but my mother is one of my muses. The moon, of course, look at this. And well, here's one about her. I've written probably 100 poems about my mother. I'm one of the people that was lucky enough to love their mother. And she was mean to me too, but I love her anyway. And she was a really wonderful woman. And this is called Green When It Rained. And green meant so much to my Texas mother, and I'll tell you why. When it rained was when my mother sang her sweetest as she cooked supper in the kitchen. Oh, she'd whisper, fogging up the window with her breath. Look at the beautiful rain, how green the world, the leaves when it rains. Rain now means food to eat next year. Do you understand? No, I didn't. We lived in Southern California in the 1950s, in the eternal plenitude midst of supermarkets, farmers markets, selling food grown in nearby cornfields and orange groves. Dairies with fat cows surrounded us, jingling ice cream men and bakery trucks filled with sweets and hot bread drove up and down our streets. In between her songs, Amapola, My Pretty Little Poppy, You'll Never Know How Much I Love You, and how I wish I could sing like she did. Always. She'd tell me of yellow Texas droughts and brown famine, how she searched shadow gullies for greens when she was a little girl, stole corn, peaches, and pecans from rich folks' fields and orchards. I'd never gone hungry, nor had to steal, nor search for my food. And her sweet soprano tales of hunger filled me with so much wanting that come supper time, as I mashed the buttery Texas-style potatoes, I scraped spotless the pot with a spoon to lick every speck, grateful to all the gods of cornucopia, ambrosia, and green Mother Rain. Oh, isn't the rain nice today? A sad poem about my mother again. When I was 6, I found out about the Holocaust. And I was 6 in 1946. You already know how old I am because I told you I was 17 in 1957. And I'm sure you're all much better in math than I am. But that's when they found out about the concentration camps in Germany and what World War II had really been about. And I have girlfriends my age that said, "What, your mother told you about the Holocaust when you were 6? I thought, yeah, my mother told me about everything. She always wanted me to know what was going on in the world. And it was a bit traumatic, yeah, it really was. But this is what happened. This was called the Holocaust, and it's misspelled Holocaust, C-O-S-T. My mother told me about the Holocaust one Saturday morning as I lay in her bed beside her where I read comic books while she moaned for just 40 more winks in her day off from the Payless Cafe. And when she finally yawned, stretched, and woke, after I'd turned the little Lulu pages as loudly as I could, sometimes she told me stories about when she was a little girl in Texas, riding horses, milking cows, cooking on a wood-burning stove. But that one morning, she cleared her throat the way she always did before she scolded me, and she told me she had something to tell me that I should hear from my mother. Hunger, gas showers, shaven-headed women, 60-pound men, human skin lampshades, the war so much more than white oleo, FDR speeches on the radio, letters from my father, my army medic father in Algeria. Oh, how you wish you had never heard some of the things your mother told you. That 6 million were more than all the stars in the sky on a clear winter night. Now, a poem about my father. He's a muse too, or at least he is out there dancing and getting these muses coming at me to write about him. And his art adorns the cover of my Moonglow. And my father took to art, creating art, his last 5 years of his life. He was an auto body man after the war, and worked at that for 20 years, and then he was a Willy Loman selling auto body paint for Mobil Oil. Then he died of a heart attack, right in the midst of creating all this pre-psychedelia. I named this prototype, I forget what I named his painting, but he was creating this psychedelic art, and I know this isn't fashionable today, and maybe some of you haven't seen this, but this style of, I don't even know how to describe it. I'm not an art major. I tried to be, but I had no talent. So I had to be a writer. I'm still not sure if I have talent for that anyway. So this is for my father. And he was of that generation of the macho man of the World War II guys. And my mother was a bit of a feminist and pre-feminism. And she did pretty much what she wanted to. And this is called Good Wives Don't Drive. I remember this back in the 40s. My father refused to teach my mother to drive his car. He said it wasn't ladylike in 1949. A woman driver was no better than a streetwalker. She was to take the bus and be a good wife like his mother was. So my mother took secret driving lessons, the instructor man coming every day in a gray sedan to show her how to let out the clutch just right so the car wouldn't jerk, how to work the choke and the radio headlights, make turn signals, arm bent up for right, straight out for left, down for slow, me in the back seat, watching as we drove the LA streets, Firestone, Rosemead, Sunset Boulevard, Pico, Wilshire, La Brea, Lakewood Boulevard, Atlantic, and Santa Fe. And the day she got her driver's license, she bought herself a green 1939 Ford Coupe and waited in the front seat in the driveway for my father to come home. Then honked the horn when he arrived and said, "Hey, handsome, need a ride?" Not good. Let's read some funny ones. Okay, well, I want to tell you, you're all so young in here, and I don't know if any of you, I don't think any of you are old enough to be a great-grandmother. There's one person here, but I don't know where she is, who might be a great-grandmother. But that woman that's in here is about 5 years younger than me. I became a great-grandmother at the age of 64, and I became a grandmother at 41, and a mother at 18. So, this time span works okay. I didn't... Well, I won't read that one. Let me read you the funny one. Now that you know I'm a great grandmother. And anyway, when my book came out, I have one of my grandsons is one of those little prodigies. You know, he helps. Well, you've seen those cartoons on Facebook where this little kid is teaching their grandma how to use a cell phone. Well, he's had a cell phone, I guess, since he was 2 or 3. You know, they're all like that. So he's got my book. He was real thrilled with it. So he was reading it up. He just turned 9. So at 8 he's sounding out all these words. And he comprehends a lot of them. But here's one that's in here that his mother was very angry. Says, I won't let him read that poem. And she was with me when I read this poem in England. And she was quite shocked that I'd written this poem. This is really a nasty poem to her. And it's called The Gonad Story. Any of you know what gonads are? Well, I didn't. My childhood in the 50s, where some of you know who you are, what the 50s were like, that we girls didn't know anything. And this is about when I was 15 years old. The Gonad Story. At 15, anxious for my first diamond engagement ring, I said yes, I'd marry Jackie Lewis, who just quit high school to join the Coast Guard. I figured when Jackie came home for Christmas with a diamond ring, I'd wear it a few days to show off to my girlfriends and then tell Jackie a good story why I couldn't marry him. But the night before he left for boot camp, I fixed him dinner, my parents working late. And right after eating, Jackie lay down on his stomach on my father's sofa in the den, placed his hands between his legs and moaned, "Oh, my gonads. Oh, my blue balls. Help me, help me." He moaned, reaching for my hand to help massage the pain away that throbbed between his legs. But I was only 15, had only been kissed 2 times, and didn't know about gonads, even when he called them testicles. And begged me, help me, help me. So I ran to the telephone to call an ambulance. No, no, Jackie moaned, only you can help me. So I ran to the bathroom for aspirin, to the kitchen for a glass of water to splash in poor Jackie's face. So Jackie got up, limped home, and come Christmas, he neither phoned me nor gave me an engagement ring. He went back to his old girlfriend, Gloria, who had big boobs. And I'd become engaged 4 more times, be married twice, a go-go girl for 5 years, when I finally figured out the plot of Jackie Lewis's convoluted, contrived gonad story, a story as old as the trilobites, who first whispered it. Same story later painted in Cro-Magnon caves. That lecherous little male chauvinist pig plagiarist. How much time? Oh, 5 minutes.
No, you're fine.
5 minutes.
Sure.
Well, here's a poem for my son. And this poem is, I'm so proud to say, it won first prize at Surfer Magazine back in 1997. And my son was a surfer. He's now all grown up and 57 years old. And this poem is thanks to the powers that be. I got a stipend, or whatever they're called, from the Transit Authority. This is in a kiosk down on First Street, and it's recently been nominated for the surfing museum down at Huntington Beach, but I don't know what's going to happen there. It's called Endless Summers. Those endless summers when my son and his buddies were too young to drive a car, I packed as many boy men sardines that would fit into my VW Bug and drove them to the Surf Theater in Huntington Beach to see surf movies, the endless summer, saltwater wine. And when the surf was up, They strapped as many surfboards as the VW surf racks would hold, and I drove them to the Huntington Beach Pier, where they learned the poetry of the sea, sailed aquamarine and spindrift soup, while I lay in the sand studying for grad school exams, trying to make something of myself, and tried not to wish I were one of them. And then all the way home, I listened to their teenaged ABCs of awesome, boss, and cool. The salt and sun turning their hair golden till autumn and time to go back to school. And now, my son and his buddies, the age I was back then, their sun-streaked hair grown up dark while they try to make something of themselves, come surfing now to get back into shape. And my son brings his children now to show them the way of the waves, those endless summers, and those sonnets of sun, sea, and salt, going on and on, as endless as always. Well, I'll try to tell you real briefly about my friendship with Charles Bukowski. I don't know, are any of you fans? I've heard he's not real popular as he was, a few years ago. And he and I were friends. I was a peripheral editor of his, and he did a lot to influence my work. I was a poet, young poet, a newbie poet, and I was trying to find my voice writing important sounding poems. And then finally, this is what he told me. Let me see where I can find that. These Post-it notes have done me no good. Absolutely none. Absolutely none. This is called Bukowski Chugs Cheap Beer at the No A Go-Go. Bukowski laughed, har, 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 when I told him I'd been a go-go girl for 7 years. The bad luck time for breaking a mirror, minimum sentence for felony conviction. In 1973, Bukowski thought me one of those feminists who wanted to kick his ass, booed, stomped en masse out of his poetry readings. Worse, he thought me another bored housewife going back to college, my hard-working schmuck hubby buying my books, tuition, and bell-bottoms, cooking his own supper, diapering the baby while I read Sexton, Platt, and John, and flirted with cute professors. Bukowski never drank at any of those go-go bars I worked those 7 years. Too expensive, too uppity, and all that rock and roll, too noisy. No, he preferred the bossa nova and cheap beer at the No A Go-Go's, where barmaids wore overalls, not fringe bikinis, and could toss out any drunk, including him, with one bare hand. Midnights, Bukowski phoned me long distance, drunk because his woman had left him again. He listened intently to my go-go girl tales about men like him, broke, lonely, who drank too much, said wild things, talk of men not like him, astronauts, murderers, rich men wearing diamond pinky rings, while Bukowski chugged his cheap beer in his cheap apartment in L.A., blew smoke from cheap cigars into the telephone at me, sipping cheap white wine 40 miles away, till one night Bukowski finally said, "You gotta write about that madness, kid." So I did. So I'll read you one Go-Go Girl poem, and that'll be it, I think.
You got some time. You got the proverbial 2 poem notice.
Oh, but where are you? Oh. Well, maybe it's in that one. Well, this is my memoir. This was what I proposed for my thesis at UCI back in 1977, and they rejected it. They said it was tawdry. I couldn't write about the go-go generation there. And And it's still not, oh, here, it's gotta be in here. Gotta be in. And then my Bukowski tome that came out in '72, this was gonna be my thesis at Cal State Long Beach. I wanted to write about Bukowski. I was one of his groupies and became his friend. I saw about 13 of his live performances. And boy, was he a treasure. What fun it was. I hate this when poets do this, and I'm doing it. And I was so organized. Okay, so here is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. One of my first. It's hard to believe today how belly buttons once drove men crazy. In 1965, belly buttons, the raison d'etre, original sin of go-go bars, when French bikinis were still banned on California state beaches and American TV. And I wouldn't wear a bikini at first. I just wore leotards or costumes showing just a little bit of midriff. The go-go bars owners not caring. A shy new go-go girl gave the place class. But it drove the guys crazy. One guy one day offering me $20 to show him my belly button. And I told him, no, I don't have one. But he didn't believe me. I'm a Martian, I told him. But he didn't believe that either. He just got drunker and drunker and yelled at me all afternoon, hey baby, let me see your belly button. But I kept on saying no. It's all so silly nowadays. I sure could have used that $20 back then in 1965. I still could. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. And sorry for my hat. I'm light sensitive.
So would you mind answering perhaps some questions?
Oh,
Right?
that's right. There's going to be
Just a little
questions.
bit. So,
Oh, good. I love to answer questions. What could you possibly want to know about me? Anything?
Inspiration. Where do you usually, when does it hit
Pardon? Are you talking? Okay, what?
you? Your inspiration, like when does it hit you? Do you have like a ritual, a routine when you sit down and
Oh,
write?
yeah, that's always. Well, when I create, I'm one of those people that most people hate. I used to be I still am very creative, and I'm creative all the time. It's just, I was an only child, and when I was little, the radio was the big deal when I was growing up. Then TV, and now I don't know how children are going to get their inspiration if they're creative doing this, all day long. But I listened to the radio, and I was a lonely only child. And in my mind, I created radio stories all the time, and I'd be talking to people, and I loved the movies, and I was going to read you some movie. That's one of my muses too, the movies. And so I was always like creating at the age of 2, and I don't know, it just comes to me, and I'm always thinking like that. I'm sorry. I think maybe I'm a little retarded or something. I don't know. The doctor should go shrink or something. No, I was just always creative, and I think most of the only children I've known, and I know a lot of writers who are only children, they were lonely, and they filled their mind as really young. I was writing stories when I was 3 years old. I mean, I didn't have any letters, but in my mind, this was a story. And then when I learned language, I realized, and one of my first stories was an exclamation mark, and I was so thrilled. And then when I perfected the question mark, I was thrilled, and a heart, you know, and I read comic books. That was the thing in the 40s for my generation, comic books. And I was a cartoonist as a child. I still kind of am. A bad one. No training. But a famous poet that I've forgotten his name said, I don't know where poems come from, but I want to go there. And you know, if they just come to you and then you do think, gee, where do they come from? I love it there and I love it here. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did, thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
Are you more inclined to write when you're happy or when you're sad?
That's either, because a lot of my go-go memoir is about an abusive, murderous husband, a husband that tried to actually murder me. He went to Soledad for only 3 years. Today he'd get about 30, and that spawned memories. I mean, something like that you don't forget. Tragedies you don't forget. Happiness, true happiness you don't forget. You never forget the birth of your baby. You don't forget your happy wedding day. You don't forget happy, and you don't forget sad. It's the mundane times that you can bring all that back, and then you can write about it when you have nothing else to do. But it's so fun to be happy. But there's a lot to. But if you write so much happy poetry, like I read you happy poetry today, and then you go, let's get some nitty gritty going here, you know, because that's what a lot of movies are being made about now, you know, and a lot of poetry is being written about the bad things going on in the world. And I want so much to write about those things because I'd like to be a voice and say something about it. And in my early go-go writing at UCI in the 70s, I wrote a lot about male, I don't want to accuse any of you of being male chauvinist pigs, but all the all the bad things that were going on with women, and now women are stepping up and talking about it, and the men are talking about it too, because at least just as much bad stuff happens to males, little boys and little girls. But I was real bitter after 7 years in the go-go bars, and I was writing about all this dark stuff, and they really hated it at UCI. That's in the 70s. They wanted us to write. Well, they weren't even fond of Raymond Carver back then. They wanted this minimalism of let's see, who was I can't even think of their names that were the famous writers back then. Woody Allen, you might see, his movies were pretty happy, and you know, the 70s, while all this bad stuff was going on, there was a lot of just forgetting that was happening. But I don't know what you're writing about, but I've heard that the younger generation of writers are wanting to write about the bad stuff that's going on, the racism and the sexism and the miscarriages of justice, and I did write some no good police stories in my go-go stuff, and I just had to shut up about it. I can't go there too much. I get real sad, but you need a lot of courage to write that. Anything else?
How did you first get published?
How did I first get published? Well, back in the 70s, when I first started doing poetry, about 72, 73, it was really hopping in America. The small press was really, NEA grants gave editors up to $5,000. They put out 3 issues. So there was a proliferation of small presses, because the big presses, you know, it's hard to get in those places. They didn't pay, and another thing I discovered, they liked my go-go stuff in that. They liked the tawdry stuff that I wrote about in the small press. That's when Bukowski was real popular, and a lot of his small press writings in the 70s was pretty swinging 70s, 60s, and a lot of his poems were about getting sex and having, you know, pretty graphic. So that's how I got published, and And then later, it was harder when I went to UCI. I got a story accepted at Paris Review, but I won't tell you why it didn't get published because it would be not very pleasant to hear. But they gave me the money for it and then they didn't publish it. Then the 80s, I dried up. I was taking care of a sick mother for 8 years. And how do you get published now? Well, then I started my own magazine in '74, but I didn't publish myself. I saw how few venues out there was for women to get published, and I noticed all these small press magazine, and Kevin, you might look in there, in even Rain Dogs, there's not a lot of women in there. And then I had a professor at Cal State Long Beach that told me, men write poetry, women live it. I go, oh, isn't that romantic? Oh, we live it, we bake cookies. And I go, well, wait a minute. There's plenty of us women that write poetry. Nobody will publish it. Nobody wants to hear our bitches and moans. But when men bitch and moan, they don't. You know, I don't want to get sexist here and competitive with my husband here, who is a fine poet. This is Fred Voss.
Are your cookbooks about a specific kind of food?
Oh, yeah. Oh. Food is another muse of mine. And I got a lot of poems published in the 70s. Wormwood Review was one place that loved my food poems. I love to cook, but I am not. I discovered after I wrote my last cookbook, I'm not a good cook. And I got strung out on the Food Network for 5 years. I watched it all day long, and I'd write down these recipes, and I'd make it, and it tastes, I don't know. But I do love to cook, and I not anymore so much. But I just was so disappointed. My last cookbook, it didn't do well, and the printer didn't do a good job on it, so I never got to sell it. Kevin?
Did you go to
What?
Excelsior High School?
I can't hear you, Kevin.
Excelsior High School. Did you attend that at one time?
Did you go to Excelsior High School?
Oh, have any of you guys heard of Excelsior High School? No, it closed down in 86 or 84, and the building is still there. It's on the corner of what, Fred? Pioneer and Alondra?
Alondra, yeah.
It's a big, beautiful, in fact, I wrote a sad, little pathetic poem, My Poor Old High School. It still stands there, and it's beautiful. But that was one of the best high schools. It was built in 1906, and what a high school. But we didn't have any good athletic teams because
I asked that question because I was living over there,
you lived there.
and my grandfather went there too in the 50s.
But it was a beautiful school. And one of the reasons I liked LBC so much is because of the Spanish tile roofs. Just love that. Any more questions?
One over here. Oh.
Oh, you?
Do you think that Sylvia Plath was a big influence in your life?
Well, here's how she was an influence on me, because I tried to write like her. Because I thought, okay, nobody wants to hear my go-go stuff. I'm not suicidal. And I'm not making fun of her. I mean, but Anne Sexton, look at the women of my day, okay? In the lit classes, we read Sylvia, we read Anne Sexton, and I forget. But it was mostly the male writers that we studied. And I thought, can't we women have happiness? And finally, when I read her Daddy poem, I broke out of that. I stopped writing about the morose stuff, and I wrote an homage to my father that's in Moonglow. It's called Pagan Daddy. And it's just that, and then you do look at a lot of novels from the old age. It's all women the movies that got about women in the 50s and 60s, they're disenchanted housewives that crack up, and I just never knew where was my place as a woman. And where was my place as an academic? Because I had spent 7 years in a go-go bar, and I really knew what was going on in the world. And what was I going to write about? What do you write about? I mean, what are you women writing about? What do you write about? Who's your, what women do you like to read now?
The last poet I read was Sylvia Plath, that like The Bell Jar, and I usually just been reading a lot of Jim Morrison's poems lately, his poetry. So it's not like I haven't been educated enough to know any more poets from today, if anything. I don't think poetry is really as big as it should be, or it used to be.
Yeah.
You're not going to get any complaints about us with Jim Morrison here.
Do you have a question?
Vincent back here.
You're asking me a question?
Since-
Is there somebody else?
Someone else, I think, someone have a question over there?
I was going to reflect on the Jim Morrison comment, because you have the poem about Jim Morrison, and could you either read the poem or tell the story of auditioning at the Whiskey?
Oh, well, do you guys know who the Doors are?
Yes.
Oh, okay, because, yeah, I auditioned at the Whiskey Go-Go when I was like go-go girl looking like this and trying to hide out from my husband that was stalking me. And I thought I'd go to work at Whiskey to get out of Long Beach and he wouldn't be able to find me. And so I auditioned, and this was before the Doors were famous. This was a year before Light My Fire was made him a big star. And I danced for about maybe an hour or two to them, and they were just so horrible to dance to. If you've ever tried to dance to them, you can't do hardly anything to the Doors. Maybe maybe lean against a microphone and lie down and look at the sky or something. But all of us go-go girls like leaned against the banister they had, and the other go-go girls didn't like these guys. They were so hard to dance to, and it made us look so bad. We didn't look good. We were supposed to be shaking and looking cute up there. And they didn't inspire us. And I heard from the other girls they didn't like this guy. And Jim Morrison was up there. I guess he was improvising. You know, he always improvised. And my first impression of him, I thought he was a drunk off the street. Because at that time, Sunset Boulevard was just filled with the hippies and runaways. And it was often common in a bar where there was a band, some drunk would get up on the stage and start singing My Melancholy Baby or something, and the bouncer would throw him out. And I kept looking for the bouncer and thinking, why aren't they throwing this guy out? You know, and then I found out he's with the band, and he was dressed badly, he smelled bad, he had on that horrible leather coat that probably now would sell for $2 million, and his feet were dirty, and it was just horrible. But I hated him, and I hated him, the girls didn't like him. And then when they got famous 2 years later, I was just shocked. You know, like, boy, wasn't I a good agent, right? I could really pick them. And as it turned out to be a dirty trick played back on me, because I had a 3-hour gig in a bar when I was a freelancer. And I worked at the same agent that Goldie Hawn worked at when she was a freelance dancer. I also danced with Tina Turner, Tina Turner Review, one of the white chicks in the back. And boy, can you imagine? Geeky white girl back there dancing with Tina Turner. Well, she put a stop to that. She got rid of us 3 go-go girls that were backing her up at Daisy Mays in Tustin back in 1969, and she said, I'm a soloist here, I don't want these girls. So thank God, you know, I got to retire from the Ike and Tina Turner Review. No benefits, no pay, no tips. But back to Jim Morrison. 2 years later, I was at doing a 3-hour gig, and Light My Fire had just came out, and it was the long version. I don't know how this guy had got the 9-minute one or 20-minute one. It seemed like, and the jukebox, the owner of the Go-Go Bar would put a quarter in, he'd play that, and 2 other songs. I danced to Light My Fire over a 3-hour period. I did the math once, I've forgotten it, but probably a total of 2 hours. I danced to Light My Fire over and over and over again. But if you guys all like the Doors, you gotta go to Made down at on Pine, M-A-D-A, the Caps. Have you ever been to Made down on the Pine Street? Well, this guy over here that asked the Doors question, back in '67, 2 weeks before the Doors got famous, he was at Devonshire Downs at a concert where they were playing, and he shot these great photographs, and he's got a photo art exhibit there right now. So go down there and check him out. Check out those photographs; they're just gorgeous. Now I love Jim Morrison and the Doors. My husband Fred was a big fan of his, and I'm being exposed or enlightened to Jim Morrison's poetry. He was a wonderful poet. I was so surprised, and I'm so surprised to find out I really liked the Doors music. But at the time, dancing to him, and that was my business. It'd be like if you were a carpenter and somebody handed you an ice pick to go build a house. You know, he was my ice pick, and I couldn't dance to him. Any more questions?
Let's
Any
give
more?
it one more.
What was the name of your magazine?
What?
Yeah.
The name of your magazine?
What?
The name of your magazine
Oh,
was?
Pearl. But maybe Jeff's told him that. Do you have another question?
Yeah, I looked online about your magazine. Do you no longer publish your magazine?
No. My co-editor, my co-Pearl partner passed away in November, suddenly, of pneumonia. And so no more Pearl. She was the tech whiz, and I'm grieving deeply over loss of her and the loss of Pearl. Because we were doing, we were also publishing poetry editions, you know, now that, you know, the on-demand publishing makes it so easy to do that now. And we had a name on Amazon. So is that it, Jeff?
No, I mean, you know.
Any
if
more
there's
questions?
Other questions? I wasn't sure. Let's give her another hand.
Thank you for listening to me.
Thank
And
you
it's
so
really
much,
great to be
Joan.
here, Jeff.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to have you here.
Okay.